Today, we're making Ghormeh Sabzi, a Persian herb stew that is considered the national dish of Iran. It's a very, very historical dish, and I'm not even going to insult your intelligence by telling you I know the authentic recipe, but I want to show you my interpretation of what is one of my favorite stews. Even though it's a herb stew, we first deal with the meat because it takes longest. Now, you can do this with lamb or beef. With lamb, which is what we're using today, I always prefer the shoulder to the leg because it has more fat and more connective tissue, which is way more suitable for long cooking. I once boiled a leg of lamb for 6 hours just as an experiment, and it turned out the parts that are lacking fat and connective tissues are still slightly chewy. So, lamb shoulder today. If you're using beef chuck is a wonderful, wonderful choice. Immediately, we're deviating from most recipes. We're first going to brown the meat before adding the onions. The reason why we do that is because what we want to achieve by browning the meat is to cause the Maillard reaction. Protein, fat at high heat. That's what makes meat taste meaty. Think about the difference between a steak and boiled beef, and that's exactly what we want to achieve. With the onions, because of the relatively high sugar content, which also causes Maillard reaction, they tend to burn much easier than the flesh. So, by first browning the meat, then adding the onion, we have way more control and we'll develop way more flavors. For me, most recipes are guidelines for you to get to what you want to achieve. So if you tell me, hey, I want the stew to have a cleaner lamb taste, by all means, just boil the lamb. But if you want meaty flavors from the lamb, then browning is the way to go. So, generous amount of high smoke point oil, in this case, vegetable oil. For the herb, we're going to use olive oil, and that's what we're gonna keep. Most of this will be skimmed off before the final stage of cooking. Lamb goes in. If they don't all fit, do them in batches so that you don't crowd the pan. Otherwise, they'll release too much moisture and you'll never get the desired browning. While that's browning, we'll slice 3 onions, 3 small ones or 2 big ones, up to you. You season the lamb with salt. Traditionally, they season the lamb with salt and turmeric. But again, the spices would burn as the lamb browns. So, we'll add the turmeric after the browning. For any braising dishes, I always prefer keeping my meat chunky so that they can afford the high heat to be brown on all sides, but not significantly overcooked. Now, once everything is brown, we remove the lamb temporarily. As you can see, the lamb also rendered out a lot of yummy lamb fat, which we'll now use to cook our onions. And this immediately cools down the pan. Now, with the onions, what we want to achieve is different. We want to evaporate the water content to concentrate their flavors, in particular, their sweetness. And secondly, the moisture released by the onion would deglass the pan, mopping up these burn bits, golden burn bits at the bottom, the fond, and that's full of meaty flavors. This is the first stage of any stew, the caramelization of the meat, the evaporation of the water content of the aromatic vegetables, whether that's carrot or celery, or in this case, just onion. And you really need to give it time. Some people add water way too early, and that's why some stews are acidic and harsh. It's because the onion liquid has not had enough time to evaporate. And we once again season with salt. This will also help the onions draw out the moisture. You see the steam coming out. That's the water content evaporating. As you can see, the onions, they have shrunk down in size quite dramatically already. Now, once the onions are almost translucent, that's when we add the turmeric to make up for the fact that we didn't add them directly to the lamb. I mean, eventually everything cooks together. Turmeric is extremely overpowering, by the way, so don't go ham. Add it bit by bit, taste, and then you can adjust. Everything took on this wonderful, wonderful color of the turmeric. All right, once there's very little evaporation going on, lamb pieces, they go back in. And if you happen to have the lamb bone from the butcher, add that in as well. With a 2 to 3 hour cooking time, it wouldn't add that much, but it will impart a tiny bit of flavor. There's always the illusion of bone in, but with lamb and beef bone, they take a long time unless you use a pressure cooker. I once boiled just beef bones for 3 hours, thinking I could make pho. when I was a college student. I can guarantee that, and I tell you, it tasted like absolutely nothing. So the bone goes on top, and all the resting juices, they go in. The redness you see is not blood, it's just myoglobin. Don't freak out. Now we top this up with just enough water. If you're using dried beans that you soaked yourself, this is when the kidney beans can go in. But today we're using canned beans, so they can go in much later. All right, once everything is almost covered, bring this back to a boil, lid on, and we let this simmer at medium heat while we deal with the real star of the show. For today, we have some chives, a very generous amount of parsley, and my personal favorite, coriander. And we're just going to slice them and saute them. First up, the warm-up round, we have some chives. You can use chives or the green part of a scallion, but compared to the other two, this is mainly for color. I mean, this is the fun and therapeutic part. And we're not even doing the parsley yet. The recipe is just a guideline. You can use any green bitter leaves. Kale would work really well. Spinach, also a popular choice. I think the one thing you can't really ditch is the parsley, and for me also the coriander. Perfect, beautiful chives. And once you're comfortable with the recipe, you get to play with the herbs to see what they do to the flavor profile of the dish and pick your favorites. Now the parsley. I know the recipe calls for mainly the leaves, but I find the stalks, given the long braising period, actually adds a lot of depth. So give that a try. Once you get to the stalks, you have to go on the finer side. This might look like a lot of herb, but again, through evaporation, they will shrink in size dramatically. The Middle East, they really have worked out how to get the best out of parsley, I think. The variety of dishes. Now, my personal favorite, coriander. Even if you don't like raw coriander, give cooked coriander a try because the flavor profile is completely different. I first came across coriander as a braising ingredient from a Syrian tagine recipe, and the complexity was mind-blowing that I added to a lot of my stews now. And for coriander, we're definitely taking the stalks. Brilliant! So, one full bowl of herbs. Now, let's saute some herbs. Medium heat, you don't want to burn them. You want to give them time to gently evaporate the water content. And this time round, we use a very generous amount of extra virgin olive oil. And this is going to be the oil we keep for the final dish. Now the herbs go in. You can do them in batches if you're in a hurry, but they wilt pretty quick. And it's a very satisfying process, in my humble opinion. They first turn bright green, and then we're slowly wilting them down to a much darker color. And that's the dark green color you normally associate with this dish. A chef once told me the way he judged this dish is when the stew hits the rice, whether the rice would turn green immediately. If not, it failed. We season with salt. This will also help the release of moisture. Suddenly it looks like we don't have enough herb, huh? The red beans, the green herb, the yellow and orange turmeric, the black limes. Like, whoever came up with the dish must be a painter. Oh, by the way, for this step, please use a non-stick. It'll make your life 10 times easier. Otherwise, you need to add a very generous amount of oil. Now, once they start to wilt, this is when we introduce our other star ingredient, the fenugreek leaves. I want to be extremely clear, it is the dried leaves, not the seeds that we're adding. This would impart a ton of complex flavors. If you've never heard of the ingredients, but you've had a curry before, you've probably tried it. So, they go in to emulsify. Now, just like the onions earlier, you can judge the doneness by how much steam you're seeing. Once you don't see much steam, you know the evaporation has finished and the leaves have been wilted down completely. If you're using the stems like me, they will not wilt on the pan, but they will definitely wilt and soften in the pot. Salt for the leaves here. And in this case, we're basically ready. Stove off. The million-dollar question, when do we add the leaves to the stew? Different people have different recipes. In my extremely humble opinion, I like to give this stew at least an hour on its own. In my ideal world, I want to maximize the contact between the beautiful and flavorsome herbs and the stew, because this is the main ingredient of the stew. The only thing stopping me from adding it right now is I want to give the lamb shoulder enough time to render out most of its fat. Remember, we also cook this with a very generous amount of vegetable oil. I want to be able to isolate the fat, skim all of that out before we add this beautiful herb, so that the finished product will have a wonderful layer of green oil, but not an overwhelming amount of fat. So we give it slightly more time so that it hits the 1 hour mark. And during that, let's talk about the third star of the show, the dried black Persian lime. They are incredibly flavorsome. Normally the rule is 1 per person, but it's up to you. The traditional recipe calls for punctured limes so that they release their flavors slowly. For me, that works completely fine. Some people complain about the bitterness of the lemon, which I happen to like. But if you don't like the bitterness, what I would do is remove the stem, cut this in half, and remove the seeds. Because I personally enjoy the bitterness, all we need to do is to use a fork and puncture a few holes for the slow release of flavors. Oh, and the smell it's just so incredible. And these will go in with our herb. After about an hour, let's skim some fat. For fat skimming, it makes life much easier if you increase the heat so that the bubbles will push the fat to the sides and you just go. Unlike the herbs, the turmeric, they color everything. So even though we're skimming, we're not taking anything away from the effect of the turmeric. You know when you order delivery and the dish is incredibly tasty and you can see from the side of the container, half of it is oil. For me, that's a bit too much. So, a bowl of turmeric infused lamb fat. You can save it in the freezer to cook your next batch. And by batch number 10, you don't even need to add the turmeric anymore. So now, the limes. You want to push the limes down for the liquid to enter the punctured holes. And once the inside is full of liquid, they will no longer just float to the top. And beautiful herbs, the main ingredient. Beautiful. Depending on your preference for the kidney beans, if you're using canned kidney beans and you want them to still have a bit of a bite, I would add them when there's 30 minutes left so that the flavor of the stew can emulsify and flavor the beans. My personal preference is to add them when there's an hour left so they become slightly mushy but they still hold their shapes. If you want to simply have them as a thickener, they can go in now. So the lamb had been cooking for an hour before we added the herbs. For me, lamb shoulder stew, 3 hours is the perfect mark. So 1 hour, we add the beans, another hour. I'll see you guys then. After a total of 3 hours of cooking, our Ghormeh Sabzi is ready. Oh, beautiful. First things first, we remove this beautiful bone. Thank the bone for its surface. And look at that. We have this beautiful layer of oil with the signature green that you associate with this dish, but not so thick that would give you a heart attack. And the lime is barely holding its shape, imparted a lot of flavors. The beans are still tender, we have the right texture, the lamb is cooked to perfection. It's wonderful. Let's plate one, shall we? Wonderful, wonderful lamb. Kidney beans. And of course, each person gets this wonderful Persian black lime that will impart a ton of flavor to your rice. And this is Ghormeh Sabzi, one of my favorite stews. I really hope you enjoy. beautiful. So beautiful.